All right, we're now into the final video in this quick series of distributed Postgres, and we wanted to have a look at using Hasura at the Hasura Cloud instances as points of presence in our distributed environment, right? So we've got a database that is currently distributed across a Australian point. We've got a Seattle representation. We've got a Frankfurt representation. And at the moment, my current Hasura instance is that my entry point is currently in Frankfurt. And that makes my Frankfurt access really great for all of my partition data in that locality. But what I want to do is be able to actually have multiple different Hasura instances that I'd be able to put some sort of a proxy in front of that would say, if I'm from Frankfurt, use the Frankfurt access point. If I'm from Australia, use my Australia access, or whatever else may make sense. And to do that, Hasura uses a really clever approach with this metadata-driven layer that allows us to actually replicate all of our metadata to multiple different Hasura instances using a multi-point of presence model. Okay, to do that, I'm going to actually initiate a Hasura metadata instance from my existing Frankfurt project. To do that, I'm going to use the Hasura CLI, and I'm just initting it. I'm calling it a Hasura, so that's the name of the folder that gets created, and I'm giving it the access point. I've renamed my project to DistributedPostgres, which I love the name, Frankfurt, DistributedPostgres, Seattle, DistributedPostgres, Australia. And then I'm going to give it the admin secret that is provided as well. I will burn this later on. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. And what's going to happen now is we're actually just going to go ahead and pull down, I'll skip the update for the CLI. We're going to pull down a new project, and we're just saying, yes, go ahead and create all of the bits that I want there. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this down. And once we have this created, we're going to see access to our new data. So let's go ahead and look inside here. And we can see that inside the Hasura directory, we have access to the to our directory. Let's go inside of Hasura. And it was just giving me some errors that I'm not dumping my SQL statements, which I don't want to do. I just want to have my connection pieces. So if we look inside of the Hasura directory here, we'll see all of the pieces of data we want. We can go ahead inside of the metadata. And we can see, again, a list of all of our current settings. This is great. We're going to go ahead and actually push this data up to our root level project, make sure I'm at the top level. And what I'm going to do at this point is go ahead and just commit all this to my repository. And we'll just go ahead and give this a message called init. That's pushing all of my metadata up into my GitHub repository with a push here. And we'll go ahead and set our upstream. And with that, we should be off to the races with our instance of metadata. Heading down now to the project here, we should see, I'm going to go ahead and refresh my GitHub repository to make sure that I see a running instance of my Hasura metadata. I do. Let's go ahead and drill down here. So the metadata, we'll look at the actual databases. We'll see the databases YAML file. And we can see that we have all of our config set up here the way we would expect. Now, this is the one piece where there's some manual steps involved. We're going to need to replicate this environment variable config into each of the existing Postgres points of presence or Hasura points of presence that we want to be utilizing. Because this is saying, I will use your instances version of the environment variables. I just need to set those environment variables inside of each location. But then all the rest of my metadata, as long as I maintain this from a metadata-driven approach, I can push this to all of my connected Hasura instances very seamlessly with a CI/CD workflow. So let's go ahead and configure those instances now. I'm going to go ahead and open these up inside of different tabs here, just for the sake of ease. And I'm going to open up the Frankfurt tab. I'm going to open up the AAU tab and the DistributedPostgres US. I'm going to just cheat a little bit and copy the values one for one. So we're going to take the PG environment variable here. We'll just copy that. And we're going to head over to the Hasura instance here. So we'll go to the first one, environment variables. We're going to go ahead and say new environment variable pgenv. paste over those values. And we'll replicate that again to this, to the US one. Go ahead and do a new environment variable. We'll call this again pgenv and replicate those values. This is the connection string. We'll come back over to our initial distrogres. We'll grab the root cert file. So we'll go ahead and copy that. We're going to go ahead and move over to replicating this to the Australia environment. And then we will replicate that one more time over into the US. Now, you're going to recall we have one extra piece that we need to be a little mindful of here, and that is that we need to tell our connection that we want to actually use our IP address for these different connections. So I'm going to go ahead and come back to this area here, go back to our networking tab, and we're going to go ahead and add an additional network. I'm going to go ahead and call this AAU. And I'm going to, again, give it access to everything. But what I want to do in this case is I'm going to use the AAU project and go back to the general tab and grab its IP address. So heading back over to the network tab, we're going to say this is the network for that layer. And then we're going to go ahead and grab the same thing from our US project. So again, to the general tab, grabbing the Hasura IP address, back over to the networking tab, and we're going to call this US. And if I was pedantic, I would rename the layer here for Hasura. Can I do that so fast? Maybe I can. Oh, look at that. We'll go ahead and call this Frankfurt, or FRA. Good. Well, I'm going country specific, so I'll go GER. I am pedantic. There we are. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we got German, we got Australia, and we've got US, and that should actually give us the ability to connect to all these different layers. The last piece of this to set up manually is actually to tell each of these two projects which metadata they're going to connect to. And to do that, we're going to use the git deploy here. And I'm going to just go ahead and authorize myself here, returning back over to my project. And I'm going to look for my distrogres project here once it's finished looking for the repository. There we are. We need to tell it which branch to be following. We're not going to do a development workflow. We're just going to go live, and we'll tell it that it is inside the Hasura directory. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to notify me on failure only, and I'm going to allow for automatic deploys. We'll set up git deployment there. And from here, I'll just initiate the first deployment. And then the same thing we're going to replicate over here underneath the Australian connection, again, setting it up. And with the distrogres, again, we'll use main and Hasura and just be notified of failures. Setting up the git deployment and kicking off the initial one, which is just a manual step. And with that, I actually have multiple points of presence distributed across all three regions. This is going to go ahead and create an exact copy of my German Hasura instance, and the US one and the AU one, the Australian one, they're all going to do the exact same thing. And I will now have these three different access points that I could put inside of a proxy or some kind of a Route 53 and be able to get geo-distributed GraphQL access for all my projects just like that. And we'll see that my US deployment is already in place and is working the way that we would expect. Let's go ahead and actually hop into the console there to have a look at it. And we will then look and see that the EU or the Australian one is just about done as well. And so if we move over to the US project, let's go ahead and launch that console, which we did, and we can go ahead and run a couple samples here. Now I'm actually geographically introducing latency because I'm not in the Seattle market. So this is going to be not really able to show any improvements because I myself am actually the introducing latency of where I'm currently located. But if we run this here, so we're running the Perth, so this is basically opposite ends of the world trying to request data. But if we go ahead and run the Seattle one, we should see reasonable return times. Again, I'm the latent point here, but that's yeah, to be expected. And if I were to test this from my Frankfurt folk, that would still be adding latency because my console is accessing from a further away point. So we can see that roughly the same amount of latency that the access point was going for the distributed data sets nearby, I'm seeing the same thing from a further away location, just indicating that the time there, the round trip is actually me from where I'm located. So, but this is the power, right? So we're able to actually use a couple of commands inside the database to distribute that data across multiple different geolocations with different regions. We're able to say that the Australian users go to Australia, the US users go to, or West Coast users go to the West Coast region, Europeans go to the Europe region, and then using the same metadata set, I can push out commands to multiple Hasura instances and create a point of presence nearby for each of those data sources. And all I need to do now is set up some kind of a proxy or API gateway that would just distribute geographically which IP address I'm using. That's it for this video series. I hope you enjoyed it and you see some of the power. We do have workshops that happen on this topic quite frequently. If you have any questions or things you'd like to see, let us know, and we will see you in another video. Bye.